Welcome, everyone. I am Amy Kurtz-Lansing, and I'm the curator at the Florence Griswold Museum in Old Lyme, Connecticut. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today for the first session of the third annual Home Improvement Series, this year focused on innovation, inclusion, and inspiration. And our topic this week will be object lessons. Everybody should note that this is a webinar presentation, so all participants are muted, but please, if you have questions, which we encourage toward the end, we hope you will put them in the Q&A section below, and we'll answer as many as we can toward the end of the program. The program is also being recorded, and those who have signed up will receive a link to that recording in a follow-up email. Here at the Florence Griswold Museum, we're really thrilled to partner with the National Trust and its program on historic artists' homes and studios to bring you this speaker series. And I'd like to turn things over to our executive director, Joshua Campbell-Torrance, to say some words of welcome. Joshua?
Well, thank you so much, Amy, and thank you to Historic Artists' Homes and Studios for engaging us with this very exciting and important partnership now in its third year. Partnerships are what make institutions like the Florence Griswold Museum thrive. And these kind of partnerships, which extend our reach and yet also allow us to share and to collaborate more deeply and more meaningfully with our colleagues across the United States, is really at the heart of how we all rise and grow together. We are so proud here at the Florence Griswold Museum to partner with Historic Artists' Homes and Studios, and particularly happy that it is now in this third year of this home improvement series. It's so exciting. And I'm just so excited to, as the new director here at the Florence Griswold Museum, to sit in and be a small part of today's presentation and the presentations over the next 2 weeks. So thank you so much to all of our colleagues. And thank you to the audience who is here watching and listening and participating, and for your support of these very important sites across the United States.
Thank you, Joshua. And now to kick things off, I'm going to turn it over to Valerie Ballant, who's the director of Artists' Homes and Studios, who is going to introduce the series and to tell us a bit about HAHS. Valerie?
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Joshua, for that lovely welcome, and welcome to the HAHS family. Historic Artists' Homes and Studios is thrilled to be hosting for this third year this series in partnership with the Florence Griswold Museum as part of National Preservation Month. And Historic Artists' Homes and Studios, which we often refer to by our acronym HAHS, is a membership of 61 sites in 25 states throughout the country, all former homes and studios of American visual artists. We're delighted to have launched a new category, affiliate sites, into membership in 2022. We're able to accept 6 sites in our inaugural class, and we hope you as attendees might check them out. HAHS is a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the Florence Griswold Museum has been a valued member of this program since it began in 1999. In 2020, we released a printed guide, which serves as a wonderful introduction to the program and to the membership sites. It is available through our publisher, Princeton Architectural Press, and at all major retailers, and we are going to drop that link into the chat. A key part of the work of HAHS is to foster peer exchange among our member sites and to provide opportunities to learn from one another about the innovative work happening throughout the membership. And so we launched this series, Home Improvement, in 2021 to highlight specific projects happening at various sites and centering these talks in thematic ways that are relevant to the work happening at sites today, and providing, hopefully, inspirational models for other sites to explore for possible adaptation. We continue to be encouraged by the positive feedback from attendees and are therefore excited to offer the series again. For those of you who are newbies, our format focuses on project case studies rather than virtual site tours or presentations of historical narratives. It's also conceived to facilitate dialogue and inquiry. But one of our other key express goals is to open up for public audience a dialogue that is often completely restricted as a conversation that occurs among professional peers. and we hope allowing for a glimpse into the ongoing behind the scenes work and innovation that is undertaken at these sites. So this year, as Amy mentioned, we're specifically looking at the ways in which collections in place and their unique integration at these sites are used to actively engage inclusive audience, from site-based initiatives such as exhibitions and accessible tours to the broader outreach that is achieved through publications and programs like Artists in Residence. Today's session focuses on different ways site collections can be highlighted through formal exhibitions mounted within these former domestic spaces, which now serve as museums that are open to the public. And the way in which those exhibitions can center important narratives around the artist, the site, and artistic practice, while also educating the public about the stories related to very specific objects. Today, as many know, the Florence Griswold Museum hosts a wealth of exhibitions that speak to these ideas. And in Florence Griswold's own era, the boarding house was a place for discourse and debate for hundreds of artists. And so therefore, the museum is a perfect co-host for the continuation of this active dialogue. Many thanks to our speakers today and the entire staff at the Florence Griswold Museum, and in particular, David Rao, Director of Education and Outreach, Tammy Flynn, Director of Marketing, and my co-host for this afternoon, curator Amy Kurtz-Lansing, who will introduce our first speaker. Amy.
Thank you, Valerie. I want to introduce our first speaker. I was going to put the bios in the chat, but I appear to have made a mistake and unable to paste them in there. So I'll just say Allison Cross is the Executive Director of Manitoga, where she has been at Manitoga, the Russel Wright Design Center since January 2013. She's a professional in the nonprofit field of art and architecture, and she brings expertise in strategic planning, board and resource development, public programs, community outreach, and audience engagement. And she is the founding director of Manitoga's Art and Design Residency Program, initiated in 2014 to foster creative responses to Manitoga that evoke Russel and Mary Wright's legacy of creative experimentation and celebration of place. And she led the strategic development and implementation of the Russel and Mary Wright Design Gallery in Manitoga, which opened in 2021, which we'll hear about. So thanks for your patience. Sorry about the inability to paste it to the chat. And please welcome Allison for her talk about Modernism in Action, the Russel and Mary Wright Design Gallery at Manitoga. Allison.
Unmute. Okay. And thank you for having me. I am delighted to be here and to share this presentation. So let's begin. And we did freeze. So, okay.
Yeah, we hear you. There you go.
And you see me. You hear me and see me. Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Great. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Manitoga, an introductory slide and a few words. Manitoga is the nationally landmark former home, studio, and 75-acre woodland garden of mid-20th century product designers Russel and Mary Wright. A modernist structure, Dragon Rock, which is the home, sits on the rock ledge of an abandoned stone quarry, which the Wrights transformed into a central pool fed by a 30-foot waterfall of their design. Large expanses of glass unite interiors and the surrounding landscape, which you can see on the right, the wonderful dining room. On the table features samples of the American modern dinnerware. The Wrights' most famous line that went into production in 1939. The Wrights acquired the land at Manitoga only a few years after, in 1942. When they purchased the property, the Wrights had been successful designers of innovative and inexpensive products for the home for over a decade. By the 1950s, they were master marketers of modern lifestyle in America, introducing such innovations as the starter set, mix and match, and open stock. So when I arrived in 2013, a decade ago, the nonprofit owned and stewarded the buildings and the landscape. We did not have a collection of the Wrights' groundbreaking product designs. So my very first board meeting, a few longtime trustees who were also avid collectors of Russel and Mary Wright raised the question, shouldn't the product design legacy be part of our story at Manitoga? So that year, we organized a retreat of trustees, advisors, senior staff to clarify our mission, to probe these questions, identify priorities, and set institutional goals. Those of you associated with museums or nonprofits recognize some of these things, right? We all strive for financial security, to educate, to broaden and deepen visitation, to have greater visibility, and to think about how we tell our story. On-site display of Russel and Mary Wright designed objects was actually one of the priorities that a consensus was built around as we were to continue to steward the quarry landscape, the house, and the studio. So we decided to move forward, right? We would define and interpret Manitoga as a unique and integrated design expression and the embodiment of the Wright's life work. Our tagline would become Manitoga, the home of design in nature, right? And we would delve deeper into what role the product design legacy could play at Manitoga. So we found interesting parallels and rich relationships between the product lines. There were actually more than 11 in total during the Wright's career, and the design elements at Manitoga in terms of material expression, form, in the patterns and colors of Manitoga's native landscape. So we're just showing a few examples here of some of the products where you have jade leaves, right, embedded in melamine. This was actually from the 1950s. Had a corresponding dialogue with the wonderful sliding panels that Wright custom designed for the interiors of the home. This one is grass embedded in plexiglass. Right? Drawings on the drawing on the right shows a delicate drawing of white clover that grew on the grounds at Manitoga, and it became the first patterning of the white clover line. And right below that, you see American modern in the wonderful chartreuse, which I'm matching today. And we find that color in the early spring blossoms of the bushes that surround the quarry. And finally, one of the last lines, theme formal and informal, this dark ember, it was called, and its reflections are reflected in the quarry pool at dusk. So we determined that yes, the products had a place at Manitoga, and we would soon also set a goal to build a definitive design collection of Russel and Mary Wright designs. So beginning in 2015, we mounted temporary product displays in a yet to be restored small multi-use room. It's called the powder room. And the idea behind this was to engage visitor interest, to test ideas, and to raise awareness of this aspect of the design legacy. We're looking at the first installation where we borrowed part of the collection from one of our trustees, spun aluminum, which was really the line that put the Wrights on the map. Keep going. Ooh, I have two computers going. All right. So beginning in 2015 and by 2019, we had done a series of these exhibitions. The final one on the right are the wonderful colors and forms of American modern and Iroquois casual. And these are actually featured select items from a bequest of over 500 objects from the collector George Kravis III, who had become a friend to Manitoga before his passing. Over the years, George had made significant collections donations to museums across the country, including the Cooper Hewitt, the Museum of Modern Art. And you can see some of the selections from that significant bequest. That same year, we also received a lead grant from the Henry Luce Foundation's American Art Program towards a permanent display of Russel and Mary Wright products. I wanted to just acknowledge that the Luce Foundation was an early and continual supporter of the HAHS program. And then thirdly, these small displays inspired additional donations, helped us transform promised gifts into actual donations. And then we did receive from one of our trustees a lead gift to seed a collections endowment fund. So then the question became, where on site do we display these wonderful products? So a little bit of history here and a site plan of the home and studio called collectively Dragon Rock. So while the home was envisioned by the Wrights together, plans were not finalized until 1958, 6 years after Mary's untimely passing. So at that time, Russell was a single parent of an 8-year-old daughter, Annie. So Dragon Rock disposition reflects that, okay? On the right, or the east, is the studio. That was Russell Wright's work and sleeping area. It is connected to the main house at the west, which itself is divided into 2 zones. So you can see below, the main part is the 2-story living and dining space, and then the more private bedroom wing for Annie and her nanny Diana, right? A garage, and then this wonderful terrace you see below with French doors that open to a private garden. So over the years, the west bedroom wing had been modified by Wright for his daughter several times. You can see here her early childhood bedroom, which then he changed when she was a teenager, that then was transformed once again when Annie married in her early 20s. So the former bedroom wing and garage became an apartment and office space for the young couple. So by the time, or since early 2000s, the former bedrooms and garage had served as office space for Manitoga staff. All right. So during all of that time, much, if not all, of the original furnishings, built-ins, and artifacts were dispersed. Right. Still intact then and today, however, is the enchanting bathroom that Wright designed for young Annie. Right. It is the essence of her childhood and of anyone's dream childhood bathroom. It's interpretively rich, and it demonstrates the overall major elements and the exciting synthesis of natural and industrial materials. And you can see on the right, she had her own waterfall and pool, and then these wonderful sliding panels of plexi and encased organic materials, butterflies, and maidenhair ferns, right? So we collectively decided that that bedroom wing, okay, made the most sense to place the new design gallery and a supporting service area. So quickly we had to move forward. We relocated the administrative offices from the historic structure. We assembled an expert team, Studio Joseph, Anita Jorgensen Lighting Design, both from New York City, and Donald Albrecht as our curator. Some of you may be familiar with Donald Albrecht. He is a modernist scholar and curator. At the time, he did curate the 2001 exhibition at Cooper Hewitt that focused on Russell Wright, and he had been in the past a long time board member of Manitoga. So this is a close-up of the 2-bedroom area and small vestibule. So we opened up the space to create one large room. The idea of the exhibition was to organize it so that it had a strong visual interest along the walls. So we would group products by color, form, and pattern. And then the center would be a didactic timeline. One of the benefits of this as well was that visitor circulation was enhanced, because when this was offices, visitors would circulate through the studio and the home and then come to see Annie's bathroom, kind of bottleneck, and then they would need to backtrack through the living room and depart through the terrace. Okay, so today visitors still circle the quarry pool path, come around, visit the main house, the newly restored kitchen and dining, then proceed to the more private space of Russel Wright's former studio and living or sleeping space, come across the pergola through the hall, and then culminate in the design gallery. So this is just an image that shows the opening up of that room and the expansive view to the quarry landscape behind, or beyond, I should say. So the cramped interior spaces are now a light-filled room, and the original woodwork and doors have been cataloged and stored, and any samples that we had left of flooring and any other wall surfaces, right? And in 2021, we opened the Russell and Mary Wright Design Gallery to much interest and enthusiasm of our visitors and of the design professional and museum world. Those themes that we talked about on the right pattern, these wonderful objects that sit in front of one of his custom designed interior panels. We have color, form, the central timeline table, and then here we are out on that private terrace, which now has become enlivened and is also the egress of the visitor flow. It has earned 6 awards for architecture, exhibition design, and lighting. It has enhanced visitation, deepened the visitor experience, and promoted scholarship. And my final slide talks about where are we today, 10 years later. So on the right, the year after the design gallery opened, Princeton Architectural Press published Russell and Mary Wright at Dragon Rock by Jennifer Golub, and it tells the very early story of their meeting at the Maverick Festival in Woodstock and their envisioning of their home and launching their business. And then just last year, Manitoga received $1 million gift from Gary and Laura Maurer, along with a promise of their entire collection. And the first installment was this year of very early, rare, and precious pieces from the 1930s, including a baby grand piano. And then just this week, Manitoga acquired the trademarks and intellectual property rights of Russell and Mary Wright from daughter Anne. So thank you for the opportunity to share what was a decade's journey, right, from a question at a board meeting to the realization of a dream at Manitoga. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison. Your talk wonderfully illustrates how a project of this scale can evolve and take shape over time, ultimately resulting in a permanent new facet for enhanced visitor engagement. And I think your presentation can serve to inspire other peers who are perhaps tentatively exploring wading into these waters, but it also helps our public audience understand the thinking and logistics that go into bringing these types of initiatives to fruition. especially when integrating a modern gallery space within a historic building on site where furnishings are intact in other spaces. What I think everyone can appreciate is the unique opportunity the exhibition provides for creating these such important linkages between life and artistic practice, and the consistent interrelationship which exists between the homes these artists created, the artwork they made, and the impact of other passions like the Wright's appreciation and devotion to nature, what they had on the art practice. And so with the ability to witness these connections in very tangible ways by visiting a place like Manitoga, this is an experience, of course, that is completely distinct from seeing works by Wright exhibited in another type of venue or exhibition forum. And so often exhibitions at HAHS sites offer this unique type of immersion. So I thank you for making that connectivity very visible, both through your presentation and of course, in the magnificent new but not so new now gallery at Manitoga, which of course everyone should flock to see. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. I think Amy has figured out how to put bios in the chat, but I'd like to introduce Kathy Motes Bennewitz, who is the Executive Director of the Edward Hopper House Museum and Study Center in Nyack, New York. And her presentation today is entitled Edward Hopper's Boyhood on the Hudson River and Emerging Artistic Vision, an exhibition recentering Hopper and Nyack. So welcome, Kathy.
Thank you very, very much. Allison, that was fascinating. I was really, I have lots of questions for you after mine. It'd be nice to have that, that discourse.
Okay.
It's also wonderful to be here today and to join both of you, Valerie and Amy, and again, and Allison and everybody watching online at this opening session of HAHS's Home Improvement Series. Our site is the birthplace and family home of one of the most recognizable artists of American art. Recently, Edward Hopper's paintings became popular culture icon when the saying, "We are all living in a Hopper painting," went viral during the pandemic. Let me just move here. Pardon me. Through the Whitney's blockbuster exhibition, many thousands became reacquainted with Hopper's work this past year, and through the upcoming summer shows at the Cape Ann Museum and also at a fellow HAHS site, the Farnsworth Museum and Brandywine River Museum, along with the 2024 American Masters documentary that will be airing. Many more will become familiar with Hopper in their own homes and globally and nationally. While this exhilarating and reserved, bright and lonely, comforting and haunting man is behind some of the nation's most beloved treasures, many do not realize that his emerging nature and vision evolved with his childhood in Nyack. Before turning to our exhibit that will be looking at actually objects that are telling part of this recentering story, I think it's important to give you context and history on our organization and site. Since 1971, the Edward Hopper House and the site itself has been devoted to Hopper's legacy. In the late 1960s, after the death of Edward Hopper's sister Marion, the dilapidated building was saved from demolition by local volunteers who banded together in recognition of the property's importance then and to future generations. Now bare of its original decor and furnishings, it was established 52 years ago this summer as a nonprofit arts organization. It operated as the Edward Hopper Art Center. Here, local artists rented studios and volunteers organized exhibits on a myriad of themes, including a first to address Hopper's childhood narrative. The sites and the ambitions of the organization swelled in 2011. So fast forward to that moment over 10 years ago, with its energies focused on celebrating the Art Center's 40th anniversary, but most importantly, on renewing attention on Hopper's Nyack years and really elevating the institution to a professional organization and eventually a museum. The rented spaces that were housed in the former parlors of the Hopper House were changed into galleries, jewel-like galleries for curated exhibitions. And the original kitchen was reformatted and refitted to display Hopper's juvenilia and family archives. These efforts culminated in a major exhibition, Edward Hopper Prelude, the Nyack Years in 2011, which included major loans from the Whitney Museum and at the time, the Art Thayer Sanborn Trust, and scholarly contributions of curators Avis Behrman and Elizabeth Thompson Colery. Exhibitions and site-wide installations of contemporary art followed, and they were punctuated by artist member shows. When the Art Center was rechartered as a museum in 2017, a new mission and strategic plan followed. These still guide us to look at Hopper's example as a springboard for exhibitions that showcase accomplished artists inspired by his art, philosophy, and practice. For example, one such exhibition on your upper right was also titled Object Lessons of all things, and it emphasized the influence of childhood objects on contemporary artists' personal and artistic development. Another featured an installation of origami vessels with poetic messages that drew upon Hopper's boyhood interest. And then last summer, the exhibition of Barclay Hendricks' plein air landscapes, which you see on the lower left, drew its title from Hopper's own musings on the aim of his painting, which he said, quote, has always been the most exact transcription of nature possible of my most intimate, has always been the most exact transcription possible of my most intimate impressions of nature. Then in the 2014, Edward Hopper House focused on Josephine Nivison Hopper, Edward Hopper's wife. And recently, this past year, in 2021, 2022, we made it a major exhibition called Edward's Muse, also curated by Beth Colery. And this drew from a recent gift of over 50 of her watercolors from the Sanborn Trust. While these exhibitions remained, going on and being scheduled, in 2016, a reinstallation or reimagining, as it's been called, took place in the second floor space that had served as Hopper's bedroom and studio from his adolescence until relocating to New York City in 1908. Using Hopper's early drawings and paintings of his bedroom as a guide, the museum sought to envision how the room may have looked during the artist's years living here. Very little of the furnishing survived, but in this room, the upholstered chairs, the bed frame, and end tables belong to the Hopper family. And they're installed here with an easel that Edward Hopper used as a mature artist in New York City. This 2016 staging was an important recentering of the space in the house that had been previously rented out as an artist studio. Strong rays of morning sun regularly streamed through the east and south facing windows, and the view of the Hudson River is enjoyed daily by our visitors, and it helps to broaden their understanding of Hopper and the influences of Nyack. So now let's refocus our conversation on the 2022 exhibition and how it brought back Hopper's boyhood story into the galleries for the first time since 2011. The original conception of Edward Hopper's Boyhood on the Hudson River was envisioned prior to the pandemic as an expansive and permanent site-wide installation. As such, it marked a major shift from the exhibition schedule thus far pursued. Grounded on expertly executed humanities research, it was to be augmented by sound, video, and other media to transport audiences to Hopper's Nyack and experience the shapes, colors, and textures of an artist's home and hometown that nurtured the development of one of our nation's great artistic careers. However, in late 2021, it was necessary to retool its scale, scope, and intention to mount it in 2022. Having come on board at that point, I worked with our curator to renegotiate grants, adjust the budget, arrange for new loans, and reschedule the show to coincide with Edward Hopper's New York at the Whitney. This was important as we lent work by Josephine to that milestone show, and they in turn lent 10 drawings to ours. And these were the first such loans since 2011 to the Edward Hopper House. The primary goal remained to present a domain of Hopper that enveloped his formative years, and also to define his key years here from the mid-1980s to 1899, and also when he commuted to New York. But most importantly, it had to center attention on the research, interpretation, display, and in the end, the primacy of key objects, mainly juvenilia and drawings by young Edward Hopper. We also needed to incorporate family artifacts from our collection and the Sanborn Hopper family archives that had been created in 2017 and that also had been recently digitized and conserved with NEH and IMLS grants. In 2017, the Edward Hopper House Museum had received over 1,000 artifacts and memorabilia of Edward Hopper's family, and library books, articles, and papers and documents from the Art Thayer Sanborn Hopper Collection Trust. This uniquely and meticulously preserved collection really consisted of materials from about Hopper's formative years, including these objects you see here. The materials enlarge Hopper's story and inspired our exhibition. The collection in every sense brings Edward Hopper home to Nyack. To tell the story for visitors making the journey here, we also needed to recenter the narrative on the Hopper family home itself. Built in 1858 by Hopper's maternal grandparents, John DeWint Smith and Martha Griffith Smith. And in other words, it wasn't the Hopper house to start, it was the Smith house. The house is not only the venue of the exhibition, but it is at its heart. In the year the artist was born, his widowed grandmother added a ground floor extension seen in the photograph and the drawing from the rear by Edward on the right. And that provided a parlor and indoor kitchen. This accommodated the growing family, which included the grandmother and now the family of 4. The second floor with its gabled roof and Queen Anne enrichments was added by the Hoppers themselves after 1892 when Martha Smith passed away. It included, for the first time, an indoor bathroom with running water, a new master bedroom, and another room possibly for a domestic. Around the same time, dwellings were built on the rear property to provide the family with rental income. In selecting the drawings for the show, we now asked what was it in Nyack that Hopper saw, explored, and rendered upon leaving his house every day to traverse the village hub as a youngster? And what was the importance of such places, scenes, and objects to Nyack's own history? His early drawings make clear an emerging attraction to themes of storefronts, lone workers, interiors, and maritime building, boat building. Others reveal a fascination with the dynamics of steam-powered fire engines and locomotives of the day. To do this and to help transport and orient visitors to his environs, we installed in the main hallway a very large-scale map of Hopper's Nyack. In doing so, we sought to roll back time to enable visitors to explore the neighborhood of 1891 when Edward was 9. This is important for audiences in any direction in this little village of Nyack on the Hudson River. It still retains much of the topographic and architectural quality of Hopper's youth. We also installed a similar map in the bedroom to orient people to the view from the second floor. But another important object was this silk and satin gown with couched embroidered sleeves and sashes belonging to Edward Hopper's mother, Elizabeth Griffith Smith Hopper, who went by Lizzie. Its purpose was to amplify her presence and voice. To fully understand Edward Hopper and his artwork, it is important to understand the women in his life, including his mother, as well as Jo. The dress silhouette and aesthetic movement palette of beige, mauve, and olive suggest a mid-1890s date. Sadly, it had never been shown at the Edward Hopper House, so it had been in the collection for decades, as it was thought too historical and not true artwork. Incredibly fragile, this gown was carefully mounted by costume curator Lynn Bassett. The occasion for which it was worn is unknown, yet the formality of it speaks to Mrs. Hopper's sense of social station in Victorian Nyack, despite the family being firmly stationed in the middle class. The dress was displayed within a wallpapered vignette to hint at the former Victorian interior of the house, and most importantly, to give Lizzie a more central role in the narrative of the house and also Edward's life. This is key, as she was born in this house in 1835, married here in 1879, gave birth at home to Mary in 1880 and Edward 2 years later. Along with her mother, she was the stalwart matron of the domestic realm and also cultivated the religious vibrancy of the household. We also learned that Lizzie was educated at Rockland Female Institute in South Nyack and was a talented artist herself. Examples of her drawings and also those by her relatives from the 1830s that came from the Sanborn Trust were hanging to the right of her dress. The graphite drawing you see here of the family group was drawn by Lizzie in 1862 when she was 8 years old. We also had examples of work by Edward Hopper's sister, Marion. Filling in voices like hers will create a more dynamic and inclusive experience at the house, while also presenting her story and artistic vision as a critical part of Hopper's own narrative. This exhibition also launched a larger investigation in the dynamics of public education that contributed to Hopper's forging a path to becoming an artist. His artistic ability was noticed as early as grade school, and his notebooks like these are filled with illustrations and impeccable penmanship, further attesting to his skills. We explored the history of Nyack Public Schools and discovered that in 1887, the Nyack school principal directed his professionally trained teachers to demonstrate, quote, a love for the work and a power to interest. Through Hopper's high school zoology notebooks, which you see here, we've become visually aware that Edward too was diligent, engaged, and quite studious. We also learned a critically important fact, which was a new, very important element of Edward Hopper's background. In 1891, when he was 9 years old, drawing was introduced to the curriculum at every grade level at the Nyack Public Schools. Newspapers reported that a Miss Annie Albertus, one of the most competent and finished artists in the place, has been engaged to look after this department, and she spends 2 days each week in the school. The final object I want to bring up today is a small tin paint box measuring 9 by 13 by 23. On it is painted, it's been adorned with the words Edward E. Hopper, Esquire, and there's a painted profile, a self-portrait perhaps, of a man donning a rough collar, similar in style to those worn by the Dutch masters. We learned from the label fragment inside this paint box that it was manufactured by F.W. DeVoe and Company between 1892 and 1900. What is really interesting is that when you look at this pen and ink drawing of the artist studio that's in the Whitney, it was part of the Josephine bequest to the Whitney, we see strewn across the room items of personal interest, books from which he drew inspiration, a window through which he observed nautical activities, and an array of requisite materials and tools needed by a serious student of art, including this paint box. complete with pigment tubes and shown splayed open. Also hanging from the easel is a palette matching the silhouette of the one extant from his youth, also in our collections from the Sanborn Trust. Placed on the easel is a work in progress, a composition mirroring Hopper's old ice pond at Nyack after Bruce Crane's A Winter Sunset. This studio scene, with the paint box arranged so central in the composition, serves as a means for the viewer to glimpse into Hopper's studio of his youth, or perhaps stand in his own place. Oh, sorry. Moreover, it may function as a reference to his requisite program of study at that moment of time. In this capacity, this ink drawing with the open paint box may be one of the only sources of information on the artist's concept of artistic theory and practice, as Hopper left few documents that attest to the character or tenor of his own early education before heading to New York City to study under Chase and Henry. Although the development of an artist and their artistic vision may be elusive by nature, this exhibition, through these and other key objects, really relay, they were created in, what was important about the show is that we were showing these objects created in the space where he made them and lived. And they help us to begin to trace the path from Hopper's childhood games and schoolwork to art that expresses his deepest aesthetic impulses. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And it was a joy to see this exhibition when it was on view up until recently. I want to thank you for that engaging presentation and for reintroducing many of us to the important role that Nyack and Hopper's childhood home played in the development of this artist. Your talk beautifully showed how a variety of objects can be assembled to help flesh out a series of themes in the same exhibition. And in particular, when those objects are so deeply tied, as you in one of your last comments said, to the place where these things were made and where they're being exhibited today. Well, Hopper is an iconic name, to be sure, and his masterworks can be seen in museums all over the country. It is the touchstone back to the Hopper's site, which provides unique opportunities to learn about these complex narratives that surround this critically impactful and influential artist, and which this site is uniquely poised to tell. And so I thank you for explaining how very specific objects can serve as catalysts for rich storytelling. And finally, as a complement to Allison's presentation, illustrating how such a place-based exhibition can be successfully mounted at an artist's home where originally intact furnishings do not exist throughout the site. I know there are many sites within HAHS that have similar sort of histories and legacies. And so you have offered a wonderful example on how to successfully undertake an exhibition like this at a site where that is the situation, by contrast to Manitoga, where these interiors are intact. And so as we move into the conversational part of the program, I want to invite Amy to pose the first question.
Thank you. And thanks both of you for this. This is just such a stimulating topic, the way that you're using collections to kind of, really focus in on the artistry, associated with your sites. And one of the things that Valerie and I were wondering is, what concerns did you have as you were contemplating taking the steps that you did, where you're focusing on a collection or recentering the artist in the place? What kind of pros and cons did you and your institutions weigh about the steps that you took?
I'll just jump in quickly, since we, I think the pros are that since this exhibition was the first major one to look at Edward Hopper's, youth, since 2011, it really allowed us to bring the story forward, to look at new research, to have other, to utilize these newer collections that have come in. and also to tie to local history a little bit more than had been done in the past. But what I think it also does is it informs the larger interpretive story of the site, no matter. It becomes a new foundation of explanation, interpretation for our visitors that we then build on. It's just because this show is closed doesn't mean we don't, it's not next, I mean, there is another show up right now, but now, but the people that come here are coming because of Hopper, and then the shows become the bonus, and those that are coming for the shows are then understanding the Hopper part. But I think everybody that is working here, especially in our front line, really has enjoyed the new in-depth and refreshed interpretation of the house.
I can jump in and answer, it's interesting, and following up with what Kathy was just saying, one of the many pros of presenting the design collection was uniting what was this expansive design vision, right? So we had visitors come to Manitoga interested in modern architecture, historic houses. Many of those visitors did not know of the Wright's industrial design career. And similarly, collectors of Russel and Mary Wright product design were not necessarily aware of this extraordinary site that they had developed and lived. So it gave us an opportunity to tell the entire story. That's obviously a positive. And then, the cons were, I would say, were mostly resources. Right? Did we have the resources to take on a design collection and all that entails, while we, as a relatively in the development of the long trajectory at Manitoga, the nonprofit and its being publicly open to the site was relatively young. Right, so that there were needs to restore the house, to stabilize the landscape. And when you have that large of a campus, how do you, and you're not flush with resources, how do you make those decisions? And so that was a critical thinking and planning on our part. And I don't want to digress too much, but we did step back at that retreat and strategize to look at the entire integrated picture, and then to prioritize in terms of stabilization, then restoration, then expansion. But we had felt that the missing link of the collections, we could argue that was part of stabilizing the story, enriching the story, but we knew that it was going to take time. Didn't know exactly how much time, but we were in it for the long term. And I think that was important, and important for me to manage expectation in terms of, and how long will it take for this to happen, and what was needed for it to happen. So, if that answers that question.
Yeah, and just following up on that, as you talked about emphasizing collections and the changes that you're making and how you prioritize those needs, did you have to make specific changes to your, these are historic houses? Did you have to make specific changes to your, your structure and systems to sort of accommodate, this added emphasis on collections?
Yeah, well, yes, you have to make those decisions in terms of how do you, I call it an adaptive reuse, right? So it was a state of an art exhibition space, which then required us, I don't know if it required, but to get a new HVAC system, right? New security, upgrades across the board and the site, which is something that we wanted to do, but that definitely informed, inform those decisions. And it was really important because when I arrived, and for a number of years when the staff were on site, and some of you may have experienced this, staff was using the historic bathroom, staff was using the historic kitchen, right? And relocating the offices out, allowed that not to happen any longer, but then we put in, upgraded bathrooms and a kitchenette so that we can do those types of programs. And then we're able to restore or begin our restoration program for the rest of the house. So, and one other thing I'll add I think a pro of having the design collection, because Manitoga adopted the name Manitoga, the Russel Wright Design Center in 2001. And when I arrived in 2013, I said, what does that mean? What does that mean? What is a design center? Are we a design center? And so we were able to say, finally in 2021, we have grown into our name, right? We have a design collection now. And when we had introduced the art and design residency program, it's a straddle. I don't necessarily call Dragon Rock or Manitoga an historic house museum in that sense. And that's an interesting conversation we're all having. How do you be both a design center and preserving an important moment in time? So, yeah.
I'd like to ask a little question, since you both touched upon it, was about visitor experience and sort of how these efforts have really enhanced visitor experience, but also, how, number one, what were some of the big takeaways in reaching out to audiences, and in Allison's case, bringing together the collector and the house visitor, and never the two, may meet. And in terms of Kathy, people who clearly know who Hopper is, and yet, coming and inserting themselves into this incredibly potent space, but not quite getting necessarily that connection relative to why this place is important. And I was just curious, and I'll start with Kathy, are there any, in the frame of that sort of bigger question, are there any aspects that really you found particularly resonated or continue to resonate with visitors as you continue to hear about what this show meant in terms of recentering, and with Allison after, what this means to visitors in terms of understanding the full sort of corpus of this work and how it fits into Manitoga? So Kathy,
yeah,
I know that's a big bite.
No,
but...
exactly. No, I know it's very interesting. And I will say that in talking to our visitor service staff who've been here for a while, and before the pandemic, during, and now, they're saying that the people that are coming in really are much more informed about Hopper. I mean, and the reality of Hopper, whether it's through the Whitney touched hundreds of thousands of people, but as did the documentary that came out, Hopper: An American Love Story. And so people are coming with a better understanding. But when they come here and they experience Nyack, and they sit on the porch and see the river at this, the house sitting at this T intersection that just has this direct views of the Hudson River, and see the town, they feel, oh my God, I get it now. I understand where his aesthetic came from. Where his some of his themes, the sense of quality of light. It's almost like if any, I happened to live in the Netherlands for a few years, and when I went to the Netherlands, and then and living there, I said, now I get Dutch painting, because it just, and there's something about being here, and it makes that experience more whole, and that understanding, so that they can then go back and look at the Hoppers that they're, whether it's at Yale or at the Met or at Chicago, and and understand it a little, the depth of his view a little bit more profoundly. But I will say also that, while this show is now down, we have an exhibition up right now of Marcia Bricker Halperin's photographs of cafeterias of New York, self-service restaurants, some of the same places that Hopper painted and visited himself. And we did incorporate more didactics in terms of centering people into the Hopper paintings, large-scale graphics that are meant to just show connections between those works, not to take away from hers, but just to show people. And we're finding a real resonance there by having these little touch points. I mean, they're not overwhelming, but they're just little touch points that people go, yeah, now I was trying to think of what that painting is. So I think that we've got to constantly do that, kind of bring his mature work in comparison. And lastly, we always have a dedicated gallery to Hopper. This kitchen space that I mentioned before is a very small room, but it's got original drawings. We have prints, and we also have rotating installations of Joe Nivison Hopper's works up, and are planning something for the summer to coincide with the Gloucester show, because it is not only about Edward Hopper going to Gloucester, it's also about Joe. So you can never not have and Joe.
So Allison, what does it mean? What does it mean at Manitoga for people to see this breadth of work?
It's extraordinary. I think that twofold. Visitors for the first time can really experience Dragon Rock as experimental. Russel Wright called Dragon Rock his experimental home, right? So that, and what does that mean? What does that mean? And so that when you then see, as I spoke about the laminations, he called these organic materials in plexiglass illuminated, and you see that realized in dinnerware, right? And you see the patterning of the Knowles Esquire, and look out the window and see the plantings. And there's just, it makes sense. We've had also former visitors who've been in the community for many years, who've since come and visited the design gallery, and one of them, and he's a well-heeled art person, and he says, it now all makes sense, right? It just makes sense. The pairings and the why this place exists, and the design inspirations. So it's exciting. And also the fact that and we didn't get into the actual house itself, but the kitchen dining area, right, was kind of a test of their ideas. Russell and Mary Wright published The Guide to Easier Living in 1950, okay? And that this was a kitchen that illustrated those ideas. And of course, we have the dining area, and you can set the table, and you can see one of the things I didn't mention is one of their lines, or a number of their lines, were stove to table, right? The idea of the efficiency of that, of the buffet. And then there's an open counter, right? That's prominent in between the kitchen and dining. So it brings a greater interpretive level. It brings context to the objects and purpose for the spaces. I can say that, which is nice.
I wanted to circle back to what Kathy was saying about how you always have to, Joe is always there too. And Allison, you have the pairing of two people associated with this design center. And I wonder if both of you could sort of speak to, within the framework of these homes that are domestic spaces, how do you feel that's also allowed you to, through the work with collections, to highlight the, not just Hopper and Wright, but also those artistic partners and the women of their lives?
I think that this is something that we're just starting on. We're because I think it's a path that now that we are able to access these, the digitized collections that we have and have these, images coming back, to understand the domestic realm and the maternal realm, the female world of the house that Hopper grew up in, I think is really, really important. Much more to do there, to understand activities and station in life, and that how Mrs. Hopper and even his sister, their activities in the community, and Edward Hopper's too. I mean, understanding more about what he did and what he was engaged with or not engaged with, and and understanding that fabric. But it was a very strong and with formidable female presence. Interestingly, he enters into a similar marriage. But Joe's presence in the house was as a visitor. She would come with him after they met. They'd pick up the Buick and drive on their sojourns to their sketching trips to Maine, or to to Gloucester, or eventually to Truro. The car was kept here. So she had a relationship with Marion and with the mother. So it's learning more about that, and that transition and relationship between both spheres of Edward and Joe's life. I think that is where we need to go, and it's a collective effort. And I think it's also part of a much larger conversation that's starting to happen about art, the artist's wife, and even in having some small conversations about Wyeth. I mean, it ends up that Betsy Wyeth and Joe Nivison Hopper were friends. It's finding out all these other little parallels and connections that we haven't really explored yet. And I think that's what's really exciting.
Yes. Well, a bit different. When I arrived and before, Manitoga, it was all Russel Wright. Only Russel Wright. I can say that fairly. And part of that, of course, because the history was such that the nonprofit, we were the keepers, right, of the house and the landscape, right? And we talked about the fact that even though they purchased the property together in 1942, Mary passed in 1952. And the actual building of Dragon Rock, and until 76, when Russel Wright passed, was about Russel Wright, being there and living there. And so the design collection gave us the opportunity to elevate, to draw her into the picture, because she was an equal partner in their design firm. And Mary was an artist and a designer. And for conventions, for reasons that we all know within the design world, Russel was pushed to the forefront, but she was the marketing genius and the business partner. And he would not, or they would not have been a success without her. And that is definitely true. So that allowed that. Then when Jennifer, the researcher and author Jennifer Gulla came, she had collected, and this was happening. We were putting together the design gallery, or the ideas, and she wrote this book. And she found Mary's voice in the early years, which then fed back. And when we first wrote the proposal to the Luce Foundation, it did not have Mary's name in that title. And so it was a coming together of, yes, her name is part of this. It is the Russel and Mary Wright Design Gallery. And, our next question, and a conversation I had with their daughter, Annie, just the other day when we were acquiring the trademarks and the intellectual property, she asked me, so will you change the name to Manitoga the Russel and Mary Wright Design Center. And I said, well, isn't that interesting? Because I was going to ask her opinion. I was going to, so here we go. And there's every reason to, as our umbrella is beyond she envisioned the house. She didn't live quite there in the house as it was built. But her memory and her ideas are part of it. The design collection is part of it. And part of our mission and responsibility is to steward and share the legacy and move it forward, right? So, and inspire others in design. So it afforded all of that. And I'm very excited by it. Yeah.
I wanted to now pivot a little bit back to sort of the other sort of opportunities that having exhibitions, whether permanent or this sort of really seminal recentering exhibition, can provide for other types of engagement. And so wanted to speak with you, Kathy, about the really rich programming that you use to dovetail into this exhibit, as well as sort of dovetailing into a major moment through the Whitney show, et cetera, how those all things play together. And with you, Allison, after really talking about what that gallery meant in terms of an enhancement of what was already at your site, an incredibly strong model for others, which is your artist in residency program. So Kathy, talk a little bit about like what you then, as the bedrock foundation, the exhibit, how you sort of worked out from that to really create a whole suite of engagement for people to partake in.
Well, I think that what we're actively doing this now, and this is this continuation. As I said before, it's like you now have a new baseline of what that story is. We're taking the this map, this huge map, wall-size map, and we're actually going to create a banner-sized version. And once the house is painted, which is going to happen very soon, we're going to install it outside, especially during our summer and our jazz series, when we have hundreds of people come to our site every Thursday night for 8 weeks, and to bring the interpretation out, bring it outside, so that people who are just wandering by, the people who live in Nyack, people who walking their dogs, who sit on the porch, can realize that there's something more here, and then come inside. Go to a program, go to a talk, become a member, whatever it might be in that way. But we also are creating, we've had a kind of virtual walking tour, so to speak. We had the opportunity through these American cruise lines to develop a more historically based one that kind of goes through the center of the village, and understanding then, the footsteps of Hopper and his family going shopping, or going to the store, or going to his father's, own dry goods store. And we're redoing that. But more importantly, we're creating smaller family guides. And this is something I'd love to talk to David about. But we're creating small manageable chunks, if you will, of that buckets of that tour. So one might be around the block, one might be down to the river, one might be to the father's store and back, things that young people and families can do, but also giving them what we're calling the would-be artist kit. Edward Hopper, in addition to having that paint box that is so stimulating and exciting, he also had a little pencil box that he inscribed at probably 8 or 9 years old, would-be artist on it. So we're using that to kind of inspire a takeaway art activity that people can go, wander the town and sketch. And whether it's something that Edward Hopper sketched or not, it doesn't really matter, but just to be creative in the community. So those are things that we're rolling out now. And we're actually doing the latter in memory of a board member's daughter who was an arts educator that sadly passed away early. So it brings it pulls it together in a nice personal way. So that's something that those are some of the educational offerings. And then we've also really opened up a larger plethora of parlor talks or tea talks, and had artists like James Prosek come, who had a similar young experience as being someone who knew what his life's work was going to be at a very young age, and also went out like Hopper did, and with a sketchbook in hand, and trying to bring that story forward to contemporary artists, but not necessarily showing that they mirror Hopper, but that these experiences are shared. And I think that that's the beauty of being at a site that is a birthplace and family home. And lastly, the last thing I'll mention is that also this summer we're going to be celebrating Ellsworth Kelly's centennial with an exhibition called The River, a series of lithographs of rivers from around the world that include the Hudson and the Seine, so things that connect to Hopper. But more importantly, it's a centennial celebration of his birth. And so it allows us as a birthplace, which I think we may be one of the only ones in the group, to really celebrate that with Ellsworth Kelly's story. And so, we can go off in these different directions, but make it a rich tapestry. And the texture and of it, I think is important.
Before you say anything, Allison, I think that sort of tapestry model and is something that other sites within HAHS can emulate. You gave some pretty concrete examples. Yes, you're one of a handful of sites associated with childhood experiences of artists within this network, but making those types of bigger connections either to artwork or to experiences are things that I think are always a good touchstone, and making it contemporarily relevant. And to that point, Allison has long had a very, very rich artist in residency program at Manitoga to make that bridge. But I am very interested in what the addition of that design gallery meant for, what that meant for those artists, not just visitors, but those artists who are partaking in that particular experience at Manitoga.
Well, it's interesting because it has somewhat not altered the landscape, but changed it a bit. So another aspect, talking about tapestry, at Manitoga is in the last 5 years of his life, or maybe even the decade. So Russel Wright gave the property to the Nature Conservancy, and he wanted to open a nonprofit, Man in the Environment, because he was really focused on the landscape, right? And he planned days of dance and days of music. So part of our art and design residency program includes performance. It's an extremely important part of what we do, and it is, in my opinion, one of the highest uses of the site. It's a natural amphitheater, and it's just a transformative. I can say that. But then there was also the visual art component. And one of the things I didn't mention about the bedroom wing, after we vacated the offices, one of the rooms we used also as a site for artist intervention. So it served briefly for that purpose. But most of the work, whether it was sculpture or visual art, was installed within the house and studio, and also that room. Then when we launched the design gallery, it opened up the dialogue a bit to incorporate not only visual, sound, and performing artists, but designers, right, working within the design world, who might have a more direct dialoguing with the actual products on site. So last year we worked in collaboration with Magazzino Italian Art and invited 2 Italian designers, Forma Fantasma, and they installed their actual furniture, lighting fixtures within the domestic space. And this year will showcase ceramic artists and / designers. So what's interesting is that blurriness of boundary, which to me is very exciting about Russel and Mary Wright, is design is design, inside, outside, on the plate. And then when design goes beyond product or service to art, and so that happens on site, and it happens all the time. Even the experience of place at Manitoga is artistic, right? It inspires the senses, it inspires through design. But as part of HAHS, Wright shaped the entire property. When we look at the whole thing as a work of design, as a work of art, right? A place of inspiration. It is a muse. It was a muse for them. It continues to be a muse for visitors, and in particular creatives, right? Who respond to the place and or an aspect of the legacy. So it's very exciting. And ultimately, as with the Hopper House and all or most of these sites, it's keeping them alive, right? It's through programs, through contemporary artists and designers. It keeps the conversation going, and it connects and resonates with visitors today. So you keep coming back, right? So come every year for a performance, and it's exciting. And it was about, and the one other thing is that all of these sites were about living, they were about life, and they were about creating. And how do we continue to do that so that they are active, dynamic places? May have gone a little bit on a tangent there, but
no, I know, I love that part. I mean, it's interesting because we, our jazz series, for example, it's been 43 years in the running.
Wow.
It's not linked to Hopper, and I don't even think they had a piano, which was a staple of Victorian parlors.
Yeah.
But it was tied to the origin of the art center, that was this vessel, this space, because they recognized the creative space of the house in terms of representing Hopper, right? And so, and by virtue of that, we just reintroduced, we had a 1 week kind of pop-up, artist member show. And part of that was to pay tribute to the legacy of the artist member at this organization. But the excitement, the absolute, just energy in the room at the opening, and the people, the 50 artists that were initially, it was just an open call, but it was electric. And it was really enlightening, because I think there is something about the creative space that these houses represent. And while we also often kind of pay tribute to the historical narrative of it, there's more to it, and it's multidimensional. So
agreed.
And I think that it's interesting. We were gonna ask you, and I feel like you have sort of anticipated that in the remarks that you were just making about what some of your takeaways were in the changes that you made. What kind of audiences did you reach? Did you add more people? And I think you've sort of been talking about how it's this keeping this legacy of creativity alive is sort of connecting you with different audiences. But I wonder if both of you could sort of just say a few words like that about that.
Our audiences have grown tremendously this past year. Part of it is, of course, the interest in Hopper from the Whitney show has been huge. But more than that, I still think it's a post-pandemic experience. People are wanting to travel, they're getting out. There's more. We have had so many European visitors through. I think I think that we're doing a better job of getting the publicity out and the marketing about us being here, and it's not only, we're trying in our community, in our county, in our state, we're really trying to work together on tourism and not be siloed in terms of the marketing. And there's a huge effort to do that. So I think that, I think we're seeing a lot of, we're growing in the community in terms of, we're reaching new audiences, but it's still a little hard to measure. But we've definitely, since I've been here in the past year and a half, I mean, I started in October of 21, and we were just opening doors. I mean, we were open Fridays and Saturdays, and now we're going to be open this summer. We're back to a full pandemic schedule of Wednesdays to Sundays. So, it's exciting. It's a feeling of growth and
yes, audience is an interesting question. It's an interesting topic at Manitoga because, like the Hopper House, these are intimate spaces. All right, we have 75 acres. The trails are open, free to the public. It's still under-discovered, which I think is okay to a certain degree. So one of the things, I think our, we are looking to build relationships, right? So and for me, the invitation to artists, to creatives, they build community, right? So we wanted to build a community at Manitoga when I arrived. And that helped us do that. All of the artists, or many of them, still come to our programs, to our annual opening, and they bring their people. We want our visitors who came one year to come back, right? So that we're building relationships at Manitoga. It also sometimes has to do with your locale. Garrison, it's not far from New York City, but it's not necessarily on the high tourism path. We can't accommodate large buses, so there's certain limitations to that angle. But the art and design residency program, the design collection, has diversified our audience. And I think that what the design collection has done, which is what Russel Wright intended, he wanted his house to be used as an example, to inspire daily life, to inspire design decisions, which everyone coming through, can look at. How can I harmonize with nature, right? How can I create interest on a horizontal, vertical plane? And then it becomes a place where increasingly we have design and architecture firms wanting to come and spend half the day, right? That is one of our goals, the idea of a retreat, the idea of immersion, right? How can you, as an office, as a group, can you come and solve a problem at Manitoga? Can you take a walk out on the trails, right? And leave the gadgetry, leave the city behind, as Russel Wright had intended, and then you come together and convene and have a conversation, right? So that's the kind of community we're trying to build through, and same thing with the performance, right? So you come and have this experience every year, or every other year, and then it's a place. It is a place of inspiration. I keep coming back to that. And recently, and we just had another retreat this October, right? So it's like, oh, it's the next 10 years, but it's everyone there agreed, rather than spread wider, go deeper, right? And that's what our focus is on now. And what does that mean? How do you go deeper on site, more time, more focus, return? So yeah, it's interesting. Oops.
Absolutely. Yes, I think we're reaching the end of our time in this really fruitful discussion. And I am going to, Valerie, did you have anything you wanted to add before I give our wrap up, our information?
No, our participants have been shy. There have not been a lot of questions, but I know that this has been a really engaging conversation that really sort of captures the ethos of what we're trying to do with this series, and I hope that others will continue to join us. And of course, we all as practitioners could speak for hours, I think, on these various topics. And of course, because your answers were so amazingly thoughtful and insightful, we didn't allow you to ask each other a question. But now that you know each other, you can be able to do,
We'll do that offline.
Yes, we will.
Offline.
Or in person.
With that, I will let you do the wrap up, Amy.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie. So next week, I hope everybody will come back and visit us again for next week's program and share the word. David has pasted into the chat next week's speakers and the focus of that topic, which will look at accessible tours. I think that's something we all can really learn a lot from. And then I also want to say to everybody that if you've enjoyed this program, you may also enjoy, or will definitely enjoy, the road trips that HAHS organizes that introduce you to many wonderful sites. Consider signing up for the next event, which is at the a virtual road trip to the Coos Sharp House in Taos, New Mexico, where you'll learn about E.I. Coos and Henry Sharp, who are founding members of the Taos Art Colony. It's on May 25th at 6 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll include that link as well in the follow-up email. Let's see. So I want to thank everybody for joining us this week. And we look forward to seeing you again. I'm quickly going to put that link into the chat. So don't go just yet, in case you want to just run right out and sign up for those, as well as support HAHS, which is somebody who's enjoyed this program and many of these sites. We hope you'll consider doing that at the link in the chat, and also to learn more about the organization. We've included a link there as well. So thank you to everyone, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much to Kathy and Allison. It was really wonderful.
Thank you all very much. Really appreciated it. It was great.
Bye.